Hello again. Just wanted to do a quick follow-up video about the post-game stats. You'll notice in the instructions that there's a couple different methods offered there in terms of you can just add up the points and just use that in sort of a grid zone fashion, equating points to the player's production. Or you can, those points in grid zone imply yardage. So every point equates to roughly 10 yards plus a little bit extra. And so therefore, you can get a player's yardage, and which is kind of fun to have and relate that, in football terms. And when you're thinking about yardage, it's important to remember that a grid zone game, in terms of the number of snaps that occur, is the equivalent of about half, or maybe slightly more than half of a conventional American football game. So the passing stats won't be, you're not going to get your 400-yard passers that often, but it will occur on occasion. You will get some big receiving stats, but that's because all of the passing yardage is going to, mostly one or two key guys with maybe a third player that catches a few. And so instead of having an array of 4, 5 receivers that rotate through, you're kind of concentrating all that yardage into those guys. And then rushing stats for the main rushers are pretty comparable to about a full game type production in a football game. At any rate, enough said. So the important thing is to remember that each row that you're resolving, each time slot, represents a series, and it represents the key play from that series, the make or break play that either caused them to get a first down, or in grid zone terms, a point, or not. They were stopped, intercepted, whatever. So with that in mind, you can go through and just add up the points. That's nice and easy. A lot of people do that, and that has its own grid zone flavor to it. Or you can give it more of a football flavor and roll for the yardage. So let's see here. Jalen Church, we'll do Denver here as an example. So there's 8, 9, 10, 11. So we know he's got at least 110 yards plus 1. Let's make that 111 yards. All right, that was his net for the game. So maybe he had, a couple receptions in there. We know he had 1 reception on a key play of 0, so he was stopped, although he made a catch. And there may have been other plays in there where he was minus a yard or plus 1 or 2 yards or whatever. And then, the big plays is what adds those increments of 10-ish. All right, so 111 yards on the day was what he ended up with. Huey Shepard, we've got 5 points for him, so that's 50 yards plus 4. Give him 54 yards. Dyer, Eric Dyer, or Ethan Dyer, the running back, also caught a couple short passes, so he's got 20 yards base plus 6, so that's 26. So there we get 10, 11, and 7, 8, 9, and there's 191 yards. There we go. Put that in the wrong box. So 191 yards of total passing production, and that's credited to Lance Ingram. And on you go, right, through the rest of the players. So here's for rushing, Eric Dyer, or Ethan Dyer, I keep wanting to call him Eric, 8, 9, 10. So there's 100 yards base plus 8. So 108 yards on the day, 2 touchdowns, by the way. And Jalen Church also had a good run in there for 20 yards base plus 5, 25. And then I also like to give credit to, even if somebody didn't get credited with a highlight play, I still like to account for yardage, since we're talking about some mundane yardage here. So the other player on Denver's team sheet that gets carries is Shepard. And so his base is 0, right? So we'll write Shep in here. And his base is 0, but let's just see if he had some other yards that occurred outside of the highlights. So that gives him 7 yards there. So what do we end up with here? We got 13 and 5 is 18. 138 yards total rushing in the game. So there you can get the team's total yardage, you can get the passing yardage, you can get the total team rushing, individual rushing, and that's your offensive stat block. Mainly when it comes to defensive stats, I like to keep the stops. Each stop is significant. And then you can also keep track of impact points, so a forced fumble, a safety, an interception, each negative point on a interception return. All of those things could be impact points that kind of flesh out a defender's contribution. But at the basic level, you could just keep track of stops. And for the most part, I try to do that during the course of the game. I'll write the player's number over here. I'll put a hash mark under his rank, so I can account for those later. And a lot of times I'll put little abbreviations for, like, instead of a stop, it might be, get a bonus point for a fumble, a couple points for a return, as I did down here. And so I just kind of kludge all those together. But if you want to really break things down, then I would keep track of stops separately and your other impact points separately as well. And then if you really want to get more detail, you can go even further by accounting for tackles. And to some folks that's confusing. It's like, well, isn't a stop a tackle? Well, yeah. But as the game implies, there are other plays. There are mundane plays that occur between the highlights, right? So in the instructions, what it's telling you to do there, if you care about such things as that, as tackles, then you could, for example, look at this first row. So this is the opening series in which Denver was stopped and got no points for it. However, we could go here and go, well, that highlight occurred on which down? And I've always imagined this, 7-man football having 3 downs, kind of like Canadian football. So you roll the die, and wow, what do you know? That happened on the first down. So there were no other snaps that occurred in that series. So no tackles to account for. And on you go. This here was a penalty for the next row. The next series was a penalty. And so you could roll there and see, let's see, 2 and 3 would be second down. So 4, 5, and 6 is third down. So there were 2 other downs that occurred leading up to that penalty highlight. And all you'd have to do is go through, and we're talking about the home defense here that's in effect as the visitors have the ball. So up here, we assume that implies that 2 tackles occurred. So the spot player got a tackle, and then the second spot player got a tackle. All right, so I'll just put a couple little dots in there to indicate these additional statistics that are lesser than a highlight stop, right? Okay, so, and on you could go. The very next row was a big 50-yard play, well, what down did that occur on? That also occurred on third down. So there's 2 more plays there in which there were tackles. So we get the star, or the second star player, and the first diamond player. So I'm just putting little dots in here to indicate these tackles. So you could go through and keep track of tackles, the mundane type tackles, through the course of the game. That's really beyond the scope of this game. It's, you know, if you like those sorts of details or want to track that level of defensive involvement, then you can do so. This gives you a way to do that. For the most part, for me, I'm happy with stops, some impact points, and I do like to keep track of the offensive yardage. You know, it's fun to look back and go, hey, Ethan Dyer, 2 touchdowns, 108 yards rushing on the day. Pretty good day, right? Jalen Church, 111 yards receiving. So I'll go ahead and fill out Milwaukee here. So here's another receiver with 11 zones, or 11 points to his credit, and a touchdown. That's LaDarren Clark. So he had 2 highlight catches on those 2 huge plays. And I rolled the wrong die. What's too good? I'm getting his yardage now. So I'm going to add 8 more. So he had 8 more yards in smaller, mundane receptions during the course of the game. Brandon Giles has a base of 40 plus 4. So that's 44. 8 is 12. And then 5, 6. So there's 162 yards and 1 touchdown passing for Jeff Fowler. And then here's why Milwaukee did not win this game. Ray McQuiston. Oh, you know what? Ray McQuiston with a base of only 10 yards rushing. Whenever that happens, this team's going to be in trouble. He had 9 additional yards. So he had a total of 19 yards rushing in the game. That's just not enough from a guy like him. And Milwaukee will have to do better. So that's all the base yardage that's filled out, and then you can just go through and get the additional guys. So we know that McQuiston is also listed as a receiver. I rolled a 9 for him, so he gets 9 additional yards there. So I forgot to do that. That revises this to 171. And then who are the other rushers? Giles and Clark. All right, Giles and Clark. So reading the black die first. So there's 9 and 7 yards respectively. So that's all the rushing yards. 28 and 7 is 35. So there you go. That's all there is to it, to getting your stats in GridZone. And I probably talked more than I intended to.